On September 16, 1996, the manager at the Van Buren Plaza apartment complex in Hollywood, Florida, had suspicions that something was wrong with one of the units in the building. A foul smell had been lingering for at least a day, and now there were complaints of blood seeping through the walls into the apartment below. So he called the authorities to check on the tenant. When police forced the door open, they found the decomposing body of a young man. A video camera was set up across the room, pointed in his direction, and on the wall, someone had written a message. The 8mm tapes are a documentation of a crime. Terrorist matter. They are for the FBI. Beside the body were 11 videotapes, each one roughly 2 hours long, which amounted to nearly 22 hours of total footage. All of it was recorded by the man on the floor, 21-year-old Ricardo Lopez. Officers went straight for the tape that was still inside the camera. It was labeled Last Day. And as the label suggested, the tape showed Lopez on September 12 recording himself in his final moments. But as disturbing as the found footage was, it wasn't what the police were most horrified about at the time. Earlier that day, Lopez had mailed a package which by September 16 was still moving through the international postal system. Inside was a hollowed-out book rigged with sulfuric acid designed to spray directly into the face of whoever opened it. Lopez had recorded himself preparing this device before mailing it to the London address of popular Icelandic singer Björk for, at the time, unknown reasons. As soon as the Hollywood police saw it, they immediately contacted the authorities in the area. Fortunately, the next day, British police located the package at a postal sorting office and safely detonated it before it could reach Björk's address. But even after it was intercepted, there were still 11 tapes to go through, tapes that could have documented similar attacks being prepared for other people. Thankfully, no other targets were identified. Instead, the tapes revealed 9 months of footage documenting Lopez's terrifying psychological decline.
I'm going to show you who I am. Oh.
The first tape was dated January 14, 1996. In it, Lopez explains the purpose of these recordings.
Okay. Comfort is what I seek in speaking to you. Something with I don't know, something that makes me feel better. For a long time, I've been speaking into the mirror and being my own psychologist, sort of. It's a release.
He talked about how he had been fixated on Björk since he was 18.
Björk has been an incredible part of my mind since '93. You know, it's the first song. I've started with a crush, you know, and ended up with an obsession, which I'm not embarrassed to admit now it's an obsession.
Björk had become his escape from everything he despised about his life, including his job, body, and loneliness. He also showed his 803-page journal, which was full of his thoughts and feelings about the singer. But by the time the video diary began, Lopez had learned from a magazine that Björk was in a relationship with another musician. To him, it was a betrayal of his devotion, and he wanted to make sure she carried that betrayal on her face for the rest of her life. So these tapes became the place where he documented how he planned to make that happen. He had initially planned to build a device filled with hypodermic needles containing HIV-infected blood. But when he couldn't work out that depraved plan, he decided to make a sulfuric acid bomb, as he wanted to either disfigure her permanently or take her life.
Go to the payphone over there, my list of numbers, start calling. Either I'm going to get a hydrochloric acid 100%, sulfuric acid, the strongest I can get.
Lopez wrote in his diary how he wanted to have an effect on her life. And even though these tapes make Lopez seem sealed inside his apartment, he wasn't completely cut off from the outside world just yet. During this time, his family had become increasingly worried about his well-being and had pushed him to attend outpatient mental health appointments. But Lopez never told his therapist about the tapes or what he was planning to do. And by the middle of summer, even that little connection to society was gone. His boss had been complaining about Lopez's declining hygiene and behavior. Shortly after, Lopez quit his job and cut off his phone line. His delusional plan to punish Björk became the center of everything he had left. From that point on, the tapes narrowed almost completely around the device and how he'd deliver it. On September 12th, Lopez labeled his final tape. After mailing the package, he returned to his apartment. His plan was already in motion, and now the only thing left was the ending he had been building toward for months. The final tape was rolling the entire time. 4 days later, police found him dead inside the apartment. When Björk learned what had happened, she was obviously horrified. But she sent a card and flowers to Lopez's family. His tapes were eventually released to the public. 22 hours of footage, documenting the entire mental decline of Ricardo Lopez. In 2014, an abandoned cell phone was found in the back seat of a taxi in Fiji. When a passenger found it, they started looking through its contents to figure out who it belonged to. In the camera roll, they found a roughly 10-minute video. It was pixelated handheld footage shot from the deck of a large vessel somewhere in the open ocean. The video captured a gruesome mass killing which would take years before the man responsible for it was ever found. Now, the first few minutes of the footage have been scrapped from the internet, but from what I could gather, they show the deck of a ship with people yelling in multiple languages. Beyond that, another ship is visible nearby, and right next to it is a smaller boat sitting roughly 100 feet away. At first, nothing happens. The video plays out normally, but a few seconds later, one of the larger vessels suddenly accelerates and slams directly into the smaller boat, flipping it over and throwing the crew into the ocean without life jackets. As the men clung to pieces of debris, a man started shouting from somewhere aboard the ship, giving commands in Mandarin to shoot the drowning men. What followed was a savage massacre with 40 rounds of bullets fired throughout the duration of the video, killing one man after the other. Even when one of the men tried to surrender by raising both of his arms, he was immediately shot in the back of the head. After the shooting stopped, the camera kept rolling, and it showed crew members on deck laughing and posing for selfies beside each other as if what had just happened was nothing new to them. The video of unknown origins was uploaded to YouTube, where it circulated for months before reaching authorities. The footage was eventually found by journalist Ian Urbina, an investigative reporter for the New York Times at the time and founder of the Outlaw Ocean Project, a journalism group that investigates lawlessness, human rights abuses, and environmental crimes at sea. Ian launched a months-long investigation into the footage and worked with maritime crime researchers to trace its origin. At first, nobody knew which ship the footage came from, where the shooting had taken place, or who the men in the water were. But after analyzing the video more closely, it showed enough of the surrounding vessels to give investigators somewhere to start. The shooting had taken place on September 29, 2012, with 4 fishing vessels at the scene. A maritime research group compared the ships visible in the footage against global vessel databases and identified the filming vessel as Ping Shin 101, which sailed under a Taiwanese flag. That discovery completely changed the direction of the investigation. Under maritime law, a ship sailing under a country's flag is subject to that country's jurisdiction, even in international waters, which meant the people responsible for investigating the massacre should have been the Taiwanese government. Eventually, the Taiwanese government released an official statement explaining what had happened, or at least what seemed like the explanation at the time. According to them, the men in the water were Somali pirates who had fired on a fishing fleet, and the shooting was an act of self-defense. The incident had taken place in a part of the Indian Ocean that was infested with Somali pirates during the early 2010s. So the fishing vessels operating there routinely carried armed private security for protection. This was a believable explanation, but looking closely, it had some holes. The first problem was that nothing in the footage showed the men in the water carrying any firearms, so there was nothing indicating that they were pirates. And when analysts examined the debris floating around them, it did not look like the type of vessels Somali pirates were typically known to use. However, the contradiction that finally broke the official story came from inside the ship itself. In 2016, a private investigator tracked down 2 Filipino crew members from the Ping Shin 101, Aldrin and Maximo. Maximo was one of the men seen posing for selfies on deck after the shooting, and his testimony directly contradicted what Taiwanese officials had said. They didn't have any guns, only fishing equipment on their boat. It was wrong and people getting shot, but there was nothing I could do about it. Using witness accounts, along with analysis of the voice heard over the loudspeaker, investigators were able to identify the man giving the shooting orders as the ship's captain, a Chinese national named Wang Fengyu. Wang had ordered 2 Pakistani security guards aboard the vessel to open fire on the men as they floated in the water. When it was over, at least 10 men were dead. But despite dozens of witnesses across the surrounding ships, no maritime law required any of them to report what they'd just seen. So, no one did. The bodies were never recovered, and for nearly 2 years the killings went completely unreported, and was only ever discovered because of the footage found on the phone left behind in the taxi. By the time investigators identified the Ping Shin 101 in 2015, the ship had already sunk to the bottom of the ocean, and there was nothing left to examine for evidence. But the most disturbing detail of the case wasn't the shooting itself, it was what had happened just before it. According to Aldrin's interviews, the shooting in the video was not an isolated incident. Roughly 5 days earlier, Wang had taken the Ping Shin 101 to join 3 other fishing vessels in attacking a small sailboat. The ships circled the boat together, terrorizing its crew before taking turns ramming it until it overturned and sank. The unarmed men were then thrown into the water while they screamed, "No Somali, no pirates." Wang ordered the 2 Pakistani guards to open fire, and when they hesitated, he came down from the bridge, took a machine gun from one of them, and brutally shot the men himself. Between the 2 attacks, more than 30 people were violently murdered. However, when Wang was eventually arrested in August 2020, almost 8 years after the mass killing, only 4 deaths could be proven. And after multiple appeals over the years, Taiwan's Supreme Court confirmed his 26-year sentence in January 2025. Unfortunately, the men who died have never been identified, and no bodies were ever recovered. But none of this answered the real question. Why had Wang actually done it? His official story was the one Taiwanese authorities gave to the press. The men were pirates and the shooting was self-defense. But almost nothing about that story held up. His own crew told investigators the men in the water had no weapons. And even the Taiwanese court that accepted Wang's pirate claim convicted him of murder, because once the men were in the water, they couldn't fight back. So what was his reason? Digging deeper, there lies a darker explanation. The Ping Shin 101 had reportedly been illegally poaching off Somalia, stealing its fish. Maritime experts believe the surge of piracy attacks against foreign vessels in that region during the early 2010s wasn't really piracy at all. It was Somali fishermen pushing back against foreign ships stealing the fish they depended on for survival, which meant the men Wang killed may not have been pirates at all, but local fishermen confronting one of the foreign vessels stealing from their waters. Sadly, to this day, no one knows who those victims were or whether anyone is still waiting for them to come home. On the morning of April 22, 2012, firefighters in North Bend, Washington responded to smoke coming from a quiet suburban home on Southeast 159th Street. By the time firefighters put out the fire, it had only reached the kitchen. As they searched the house, they realized the fire was cover for something much darker. Inside the bedrooms, they found 41-year-old Lynette Keller and her 18-year-old daughter Kayleen, both shot in the head. 7 gas containers were spread throughout the house, and a plastic gas can had been placed on an electric stove with the burner turned on. Someone had clearly wanted this entire home to burn to the ground. But the fire was stopped before it could finish the job. The only person missing from the scene was the husband and father, Peter Keller. He was a quiet 41-year-old who worked at a computer refurbishing store where his boss described him as an excellent employee, and close relatives knew him as a good father and a loving husband. Peter had no criminal record and no history of violence. The only thing slightly unusual about Peter was that he liked to go on long weekend hikes by himself. But as investigators would soon find out, those hikes were covering up something Peter had been building for nearly 8 years. During their investigation, officers found an unlocked safe in one of the rooms. Inside were hand-drawn blueprints for an underground structure and hundreds of photographs documenting its construction. Along with this, there were hard drives where officers found footage Peter had recorded of himself just weeks earlier. This footage proved crucial in the initial investigation. In one of the clips, Peter can be seen walking through dense forest, talking about finally bringing some kind of project to an end.
Well, it's about 2 weeks before the end. This is going to be my last video, probably till after that.
He was speaking as if he'd been stockpiling large amounts of supplies somewhere, preparing for the moment when he could stop going back and forth.
I have about 3 loads left before the final. Been doing pretty good lately, getting about 2 loads up a week, about 100 pounds each week now of supplies and material.
To investigators, the end Peter was referring to was likely the murder of his wife and daughter, followed by the fire he set to erase the evidence. And the photographs and blueprints recovered from the house showed where the plan was supposed to lead next, an underground bunker somewhere in the Cascade Mountains, which was just a few miles from his North Bend home. Based on the way he spoke in the videos, investigators had every reason to believe that wherever this bunker was, Peter was probably hiding inside it at that moment.
Basically, I can last months up here without ever leaving. I've got propane, gasoline, food, soap, all supplies. So, really set right now.
The problem was that it could have been anywhere in or near the Cascade Mountain area. But without an exact location, that still left them with 30 to 40 miles of dense woods and dozens of possible hills where Peter could have disappeared. For the next few days, there were no meaningful leads. However, on April 26, after 4 days of searching and sifting through evidence, investigators found a blurry photograph recovered from the Keller house. It was among the few pieces of evidence the fire had failed to destroy. The image appeared to have been taken from inside the bunker, looking out through the trees. In the distance, investigators could make out power lines and the rooftops of what would later be identified as the North Bend Premium Outlets. Around the same time, they received a tip from hikers who had seen Peter's red 1994 Toyota pickup at the Rattlesnake Ridge trailhead weeks earlier. Together, those 2 clues narrowed the search to a specific stretch of mountain about 4 miles from the trail. On April 27th, 36 SWAT officers began climbing the ridge. After 7 hours of searching through the steep forest, they finally found the bunker. But even after locating it, officers still didn't know exactly where Peter was inside. So they surrounded the bunker and fired tear gas in, and moments later, Peter responded with gunshots from the darkness. The standoff lasted 22 hours before officers used explosives to blow a hole through the roof. Inside, on the lower level, they found Peter dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Reviewing the footage, this is something Peter had prepared for.
At this point, I don't know what's going to happen. I may get caught right away. Basically, if I get caught, I'm just going to myself. So, I mean, I could basically be in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I don't know. It's all up to chance at this point. So, I don't think anyone knows where I'm at, but if they put it together, who knows? At this point, I have to take that chance.
The handgun found beside his body was the same one he used to kill Lynette and Kayleen. Inside the bunker, officers found enough food and water to last months, along with weapons, body armor, and tens of thousands of dollars in cash. Peter had stored everything he thought he would need for the outlaw life he'd been planning for years.
I'm getting to the point where just trying to live pay bills and live as a civilian and go to work. It just freaks me out. It's actually more comfortable for me to think about living out here, robbing banks, pharmacies, just taking what I want for as long as I can. At least it'll be exciting. It won't be boring. And I don't have to worry about Lynette or Kayleen. And everything will be taken care of. It'll just be me.
Now, a natural question that comes to mind is why? Why go through all that trouble to destroy his family and get away from them? Based on the evidence, investigators believe Peter wanted to disappear and start a new life far away from the responsibilities of a husband and a father. His wife Lynette and daughter Kayleen were obstacles to this fantasy.
Well, before, a while ago, I used to sit here and think, this whole thing is just crazy at times, and then I'd think about it, and then it would make sense, and it's like, okay, this is what I gotta do. But, now, I guess with time, I just think that way all the time, that this is what I gotta do. I don't even question it anymore. It just seems like everything makes so much sense now.
After the case was officially closed, Lynette's family used the money recovered from the bunker, along with the rest of Peter's estate, to establish the Kayleen Keller Memorial Scholarship Fund at DeJapan Institute of Technology, the same school Kayleen had been hoping to join before her father decided to end that dream. Highway 1 is one of California's most scenic coastal routes, carrying drivers along narrow stretches of road where the Pacific sits just beyond the shoulder. On the morning of December 30th, 2019, a man named Philemon Ledesma had been driving northbound near Gray Whale Cove when he witnessed one of the most bizarre car accidents. Shortly after 10:30 a.m., he called 911 to report that he had just watched a vehicle fly off one of those cliffs in San Mateo County. Officers arrived within 20 minutes and found tire tracks at the edge of the highway leading toward a drop of roughly 40 feet into the Pacific. But below it, there was absolutely no evidence of a vehicle or driver for officers to recover. With nothing in the water and only Philemon's word to go on, officers needed some way to confirm what he had seen. They scoured through Philemon's car and noticed a dash cam he had installed years earlier. On it, they found footage of the accident, and it was just as bizarre as he described. The SUV drove across the sandy patch at the edge of the highway, went airborne, and plunged straight down the cliff. The California Highway Patrol and Coast Guard quickly launched a massive search operation, with local fire crews and deputies combing the area by land, sea, and air. Later, they found vehicle debris in the water below, but unrelated to that specific SUV. 2 days later, the footage was released to the public and went viral across the internet. But instead of bringing in leads, it created a new problem. Over the following weeks, people started picking the footage apart frame by frame. Some focused on why Philemon kept driving even after the SUV went over. Others couldn't understand why someone would drive straight off a cliff into the Pacific. And before long, a growing number of people began claiming the video had been deepfaked. Many just couldn't understand how no trace of the car or driver was found, as if they had just disappeared. But California Highway Patrol quickly dismissed these claims. Experts like Shamir Alibi, founder of the deepfaked footage detection company Amber Video, also suggested that the footage was most likely real. So then how had a vehicle gone off a cliff in broad daylight and somehow left investigators with no physical evidence that could tell them who was inside or where the person had disappeared to? Well, something a lot of people didn't take into account was just how drastic the terrain is off this stretch of highway. Just beneath the cliffs are jagged rocks, thick brush, narrow ravines, and violent surf that can hide or pull apart a vehicle within minutes. In many places, once something goes over the edge, it disappears into a maze of coastline that rescuers can barely access even in daylight. Which is why it was so surprising when the case actually had a breakthrough. Human remains were found on Montara Beach, along with a California driver's license. DNA testing confirmed they belonged to 52-year-old Tracy Ivory Sinclair from San Francisco. A later DMV search also showed she was the registered owner of a 2007 Lexus SUV, matching the car in the footage. Her family had filed a missing person report months earlier, and they had been waiting for her the entire time. But even after a name was finally attached to the dashcam footage, officials never determined whether Tracy lost control of the car or drove off the cliff deliberately. And, disturbingly, this isn't the only instance of this. In 2004, a 23-year-old named Jason Afalter drove off this same stretch, and his body was found washed up on the beach days later. Then, in 2017, a 22-year-old went missing on his way to work, and investigators eventually concluded he had driven off the cliff as well. But despite all of this, it took California's Transportation Department until December 2020 to install barriers along the cliffside, and only after years of pressure from the grieving families. As for Tracy Sinclair, all that remains of her final moments is a few seconds of dashcam found footage. Millions of people have watched it, but no one knows why she was on that road or what happened in the moments before her SUV went over that cliff. On the morning of Good Friday, April 19, 2019, 87-year-old Terry Radford was waiting near a bus stop on Worcester Avenue in Mansfield Woodhouse. completely unaware that only minutes away, a stolen car was tearing through nearby residential streets as the man behind the wheel screamed that he was Jesus.
I'm Jesus! I'm descendant of God! And you love me up! Watch this! You think I'm strong? Wait until you meet my...
Terry was a retired teacher who had spent much of his past few years caring for his wife as she suffered through extreme dementia. She passed away 7 months earlier, and after years of putting almost everything else aside, Terry was finally beginning to look forward to life again. He had 3 foreign holidays planned for later that year, but before he could take any of them, the stolen car turned onto Worcester Avenue. As it came toward the bus stop, the driver noticed Terry standing there, and instead of continuing down the road, he shifted into reverse and accelerated back toward the pavement. The car mounted the curb and crushed Terry against the bus shelter with so much force that he passed away at the scene. The driver stepped out immediately and shouted, "I've killed him. I've killed the devil." He was later identified as 38-year-old Gavin Collins. Collins had been released from prison less than 24 hours earlier with an electronic tag around his ankle under the home detention curfew scheme. This policy allows low-risk inmates to serve the remainder of their sentence at home while transitioning back into the community. But when Collins' friend collected him from the prison gate on April 18th, something about Collins' behavior seemed wrong. He was talking strangely and acting as if he was on drugs. By the next morning, that behavior had escalated into something far more alarming. Collins walked into a neighbor's house, threw a bag of prescription medicine on the floor, and started unplugging electrical items, claiming they were the work of the devil. He then walked into another neighbor's house, grabbed their car keys, and drove off. Collins was in the middle of a psychotic episode, and within moments he started accelerating through nearby residential streets, while families in the area went about their Good Friday morning. What happened next revealed Collins' horrifying state of mind. The entire incident was later discovered to have been recorded through dashcam footage found and recovered from the wreckage afterward. It shows him cutting through oncoming traffic at extremely high speeds as he shouts profanities. At one point, he ripped the rearview mirror off and continued to accelerate. He seemed to believe that he was a descendant of God and shouted that anyone who didn't listen to him would go to hell.
Descendant of God! And you love me up! Watch this! You think I'm strong? Wait until you meet my... Of him, because ultimately, he'll give an ultimatum. Either listen to Gavin 1, or you're gonna go to hell. He'll disown you, and so will I. But he's now grandma's.
When he reached Skegby, Nottinghamshire, he lost control and slammed the car into a house. The homeowner who was standing in the front garden at the time had to jump out of the way to avoid the crash, but that didn't stop Collins. He climbed out of the wrecked car and demanded the owner give him keys to the vehicle, saying, "Do you believe in Jesus? Because I am Jesus, and I will kill you if you don't give me the keys." When he refused, Collins walked to the road, where a woman had stopped their car to check if anyone needed help after the crash. He forced his way into her car, and after driving a short distance, threw her out and continued toward Mansfield Woodhouse. This was the second car he had stolen that morning, and within minutes he had crashed this one too. Despite suffering through 2 car crashes, Collins' adrenaline and psychotic state of mind seemed to have erased any pain or anxiety. Shortly afterwards, he broke into another house where a mother and her 2 children were having breakfast. Collins approached them and drew crosses on their foreheads in his own blood from his wounds. Then he demanded the keys to the woman's car and threatened the lives of her children if she didn't hand them over. This was now the 3rd car Collins had stolen that morning, and the one he used to kill Terry. By that point, police had already been responding to reports of a car being driven recklessly in the area. When an officer turned toward the bus stop on Worcester Avenue, Terry's body was lying near the shelter with his legs crushed and a massive open wound on his left shin. Collins was still in the car trying to get away. He was eventually caught after police managed to taser and arrest him. The entire rampage had lasted about 30 minutes. 9 months later, a jury found Collins guilty of manslaughter, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Strangely, during the trial, Collins said he couldn't remember any of his actions from that day. He told the jury he had spent 90 to 95% of his adult life in prison, and that he had been hearing voices since childhood, which hinted at a deeper problem. Investigators later found that while he was previously inside prison, he was actually considered a risk of causing harm to others. He had been held in segregation away from other prisoners, and weeks before his release, he had set fire to his cell twice and attacked a staff member with a plastic knife. Because of those incidents, his early release should have been automatically blocked, but the prison governors overlooked them, which ultimately led to the death of Terry Radford.